My name's Kyla Scott, and I'm going to be talking about the three muscle compartments of the thigh. First of all, what is the thigh? The thigh is part of the lower limb, and the lower limb goes from the gluteal region to the thigh, to the leg, and to the foot. And the only bone in the thigh is the femur. Anteriorly, the thigh region is between the inguinal ligament and the knee, and posteriorly, the thigh region is between the gluteal fold and the knee. And you can see in the labeled images that the thigh is the red part, and on the anterior, it starts below the inguinal ligament, which is the end of the gray, and goes to the knee, which is the start of the second part of the gray. And on the posterior, the gluteal region is the bottom of the buttocks, and the posterior region also goes to the beginning of the knee. The thigh is broken up into three compartments: the anterior, the medial, and the posterior, which are all named for where in the thigh they are. The three compartments are separated by the intermuscular septa. The three compartments are also known for what muscles are in them and the innervation and the blood supply, which are all unique. First, let's talk about the anterior thigh. And I've grouped the muscles of the anterior thigh, so hopefully their characteristics will be easier to remember. The first group we're going to talk about in the anterior thigh is the quadricep femoris muscles, which is a group of four. The first muscle is the rectus femoris, and then we have the vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermediate muscles. There's a small muscle included within the vastus group called the anticularis genus muscle, but we won't talk about that one as much. All of the muscles within the quadricep femoris group originate on the femur except for the rectus femoris, which originates on the pelvis. All of them insert on the quadricep tendon, which goes from the base of the patella to the tibial tuberosity on the tibia. And all of them have the same blood supply, which is the deep artery of the thigh. Some of them will have blood supplies in addition to the deep artery of the thigh, but the deep artery of the thigh is common among all of them. The next muscle we'll talk about in the anterior thigh is the sartorius muscle, which originates on the pelvis, which is different from most of the quadricep femoris muscles, except for the rectus femoris. It inserts on the pes acerninus, which is where several tendons come together on the anterior medial surface of the proximal tibia, and its blood supplies the femoral artery. All of the muscles in the anterior thigh that we just covered are innervated by the femoral nerve, which has nerve roots L2, L3, and L4. The muscles of the anterior thigh share some common functions. Rectus femoris flexes the thigh at the hip, while the vastus muscles all extend the leg at the knee. The sartorius muscle flexes the thigh at the hip and flexes the leg at the knee. According to some sources, it's also included as an abductor of the thigh, and it can laterally rotate the thigh. It's important to also talk about the psoas major and iliacus muscles. They both originate on the abdominal wall and insert on the lesser trochanter of the femur. Psoas major is not innervated by the femoral nerve, it's innervated by the anterior rami, which comes from L1, L2, and L3. The femoral nerve comes from L2, L3, and L4, so it makes sense how a muscle that starts superiorly to the other muscles would have innervation from L1, but the other muscles would not. Iliacus is innervated by the femoral nerve. Both of the muscles can flex the thigh at the hip, and both have blood supply from the iliolumbar artery. Psoas major also gets blood from the lumbar arteries. To summarize the anterior thigh, the muscles are the rectus femoris, the vastus lateralis, intermedius, and medialis, sartorius muscle, psoas major, and iliacus. The innervation among all of them is common. It's the femoral nerve. Well, except for the psoas major, which has the anterior rami of L1, L2, and L3. But the femoral nerve is L2, L3, and L4, so it's understandable how that would happen. Blood supply depends on the different subdivisions of the anterior thigh. So for the quadricep femoris group, it's the deep artery of the thigh. For the sartorius, the femoral artery. And for psoas major and iliacus, it's the iliolumbar artery. We can also divide how they function. So rectus femoris and psoas major and iliacus all flex the thigh at the hip. Sartorius flexes the leg at the knee, and the vastus group extends the leg at the knee. Let's talk about the medial compartment of the thigh now. The first three muscles we'll talk about are the adductor muscles, called adductor longus, adductor brevis, and adductor magnus. They all originate on the pubis and insert on the linea aspera, which is a roughened ridge on the posterior femur. Their blood supplies are the obturator artery, and their nerve is the obturator nerve. All will adduct the thigh at the hip. There's also the gracilis muscle, which also originates on the pubis, but it inserts on the pes acerinus. It's another adductor of the thigh at the hip, and it flexes the leg at the knee. Its blood supply is the obturator artery, and its nerve is the obturator nerve. Pectineus muscle has a different nerve supply, but it originates on the pubis and inserts on the lesser trochanter of the linea aspera. It adducts the thigh at the hip and flexes the thigh at the hip. Its blood supply is the obturator artery, but its nerve is the femoral nerve. The medial compartment is also known as the adductor compartment for obvious reasons. Also included in the medial compartment of the thigh is the obturator externus muscle, but I excluded it from the last slide because it's different. It originates from the obturator foramen, inserts in the trochanteric fossa of the femur, and it has a different function. It does lateral rotation of the thigh at the hip. It is not an adductor, but its blood supply is the obturator artery, and its nerve is the obturator nerve. To summarize the medial thigh, the muscles are the adductor longus, brevis, and magnus muscles, gracilis muscle, pectineus muscle, and obturator externus muscle. The innervation for all the muscles is the obturator nerve, except for pectineus that has the femoral nerve. The blood supply for everything is the obturator artery. And then their functions can be broken down to adduction of the thigh at the hip, which are all the adductor muscles, gracilis and pectineus, flexion of the leg at the knee, which is gracilis, flexion of the thigh at the hip, which is pectineus, and lateral rotation of the thigh at the hip, which is the obturator externus muscle. The posterior compartment of the thigh includes the semitendinosus and semimembranosus muscles. They originate on the ischial tuberosity, insert on the medial tibia, and can flex the leg at the knee, extend the thigh at the hip, and they're medial rotators of the thigh at the hip and the leg at the knee. The blood supply is the medial circumflex femoral artery and the deep artery of the thigh. The nerve that innervates them is the sciatic nerve. There's also the bicep femoris muscle, which originates on the ischium and the linea aspera and inserts on the fibula. Like the semitendinosus and semimembranosus, it flexes the leg at the knee, extends the thigh at the hip, but it's not a medial rotator, it's a lateral rotator. Biceps femoris can laterally rotate the thigh at the hip and the leg at the knee. Its blood supply, like the semitendinosus and semimembranosus, are the medial circumflex and the deep artery of the thigh. And the nerve is the same as the sciatic nerve. Also included in the posterior compartment is the tensor fasciae latae muscle, but it's different from the other muscles of the posterior compartment. It originates on the ilium and inserts on the iliotibial band of the fascia lata and anteromedial tibia. It stabilizes the knee during extension, and its blood supply and nerves are very different. It's the superior gluteal artery and the lateral circumflex artery that are the blood supply, and its nerve is the superior gluteal nerve. To summarize the posterior thigh, the muscles are the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, biceps femoris, and tensor fasciae latae muscles. The innervation, for most of them, is the sciatic nerve, but tensor fasciae latae is different. It has the superior gluteal nerve. And the blood supply, for most of them, is the medial circumflex artery and the deep artery of the thigh. But the tensor muscle is different again, and the blood supply is the lateral circumflex artery and the superior gluteal artery. And we can break down their functions too. So there's extensors of the hip, which is the semitendinosus and semimembranosus, and the biceps femoris muscles. Flexion of the leg at the knee is done by the semitendinosus and semimembranosus and the biceps femoris. And then semitendinosus and semimembranosus are also medial rotators of the thigh at the hip and the leg at the knee. And biceps femoris is our lateral rotator of the thigh at the hip and leg at the knee. The tensor muscle is different again, and it's responsible for stabilizing the knee during extension. To summarize, we learned about the three compartments of the thigh: the anterior, the medial, and the posterior, all of which have different muscles, different blood supplies, and different innervations. Thanks for listening.